To understand Dax, you have to understand 1973. The culture of medicine was still deeply paternalistic. The prevailing ethos was, doctor knows best. If a doctor believed a treatment would save your life, they gave it to you, often without asking for permission. The concept of autonomy was gaining ground, but it hadn't yet conquered the clinic. Technology, however, was advancing rapidly. We could keep people alive through trauma that would have killed them a decade earlier. This created a new class of patients, survivors of catastrophic injury who faced a quality of life they never agreed to. It was a collision between the ability to save life and the right to define what makes life worth living. Dax Cowart was a vibrant 25-year-old man. He was an Air Force pilot, an athlete, a rodeo rider. In July of 1973, he and his father were visiting a tract of land in Texas. They parked their car in a dried-up creek bed. Unbeknownst to them, a propane pipeline had leaked, filling the low-lying area with gas. When they started the car, a spark ignited the gas. The explosion was massive. Dax's father was killed. Dax ran through a wall of fire to escape. He sustained severe burns over 65% of his body. His eyes were burned shut. His ears were burned off. His hands were charred useless. A farmer found him running down the road. Even then, in the first moments of agony, Dax asked the farmer for a gun. He wanted to end it. The farmer refused. Dax was taken to the burn unit in Galveston. For 14 months, he endured hell. The treatment for severe burns involves preventing infection by removing dead tissue. This required daily tankings, immersion in a bath of bleach and water where nurses would scrub raw flesh. The pain was indescribable. Dax later described it as being skinned alive every single day. He was blind, he was helpless, and through it all, he was lucid. He begged the doctors to stop. He said, "I do not want to go on. This is not a life I want. Let me go." He wasn't asking for active euthanasia. He was asking for the cessation of treatment. He wanted to be allowed to die from his injuries. His requests were denied. The doctors turned to his mother, who was overcome with grief at losing her husband. She couldn't bear to lose her son too. She signed the consent forms. The doctors argued that Dax was not competent to make this decision. They claimed the pain was clouding his judgment. They argued that he was in shock and that, eventually, he would be grateful they saved him. They were operating on the principle of beneficence, acting in his best interest, and disregarding his autonomy. They treated him like a child who didn't know what was good for him. They forced him to live. This brings us to a critical distinction in clinical ethics: competence versus capacity. Competence is a legal term. You are competent until a judge bangs a gavel and declares you incompetent. Dax was never declared legally incompetent. Capacity, on the other hand, is a clinical determination made at the bedside by a physician. It is specific to the decision at hand. To have capacity, a patient must demonstrate 4 things. They must understand the information, appreciate how it applies to their situation, reason through the consequences, and express a consistent choice. Dax could do all of these things. He knew he would die if they stopped. He knew he would be blind if he lived. He reasoned that a life of blindness and disfigurement was not a life he valued. His doctors confused disagreeing with the doctor with lacking capacity. We use a sliding scale for capacity. The riskier the decision, the higher the bar for capacity. If you want to accept a life-saving antibiotic, I don't need to probe your psyche very deeply. But if you want to refuse a life-saving ventilator or painful burn treatment, the stakes are death. Therefore, the physician must be absolutely certain you understand what you are doing. The bar is incredibly high. Retrospectively, most bioethicists agree that Dax met this high standard. He was articulate, consistent, and rational. The fact that he was in pain did not make him irrational. Pain can clarify values just as easily as it can cloud them. Dax Cowart survived. He went on to law school. He became a patient rights attorney. He got married. He lived a productive life despite his blindness and disability. You might look at this outcome and say, see, the doctors were right. Beneficence won. He has a good life. This is the future self argument, that the future, happy Dax, justifies the violation of the present, suffering Dax. But Dax himself rejected this. For 40 years, until his death in 2019, he maintained that the doctors were wrong. Dax famously said, "The fact that I'm enjoying life now doesn't justify what they put me through then." He argued that freedom includes the freedom to make what others consider a mistake. He argued that the agony of the 14 months of treatment was a price he did not want to pay, and it was not the doctor's right to force him to pay it. He essentially argued that his body was his property, and by treating him against his will, they were committing assault. His perspective shifted the field of bioethics. It established that the subjective experience of the patient matters more than the objective medical outcome. Because of cases like Dax's, the law is now absolute. A competent adult has the right to refuse any medical treatment, even if that refusal will result in certain death. A Jehovah's Witness can refuse a blood transfusion. A cancer patient can refuse chemo. A diabetic can refuse amputation. The physician's role is to ensure they are informed, to explain the risks clearly. But once the patient understands, the physician must respect the refusal. If you force treatment on a competent patient today, you can be sued for battery. We have moved from doctor knows best to patient decides. To conclude, Lesson 1, respecting autonomy is easy when the patient agrees with you. It is agonizing when they don't. It is incredibly hard to stand by and watch a treatable patient die because they refuse care. But that is the price of liberty. There are exceptions, emergencies where consent is impossible, or public health threats like tuberculosis. But in the privacy of the clinical encounter, the patient is king. But what happens when the patient cannot speak? When they are in a coma, who becomes the king then? In the next lesson, we will explore surrogate decision-making through the tragic cases of Karen Ann Quinlan and Nancy Cruzan.